ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to week 14 as we get closer to the end of the 16-week semester here. We are entering a new section, our last section. As you can see there at the bottom of the slide, we are in the nervous system now. So for the next 3 weeks, week 14, 15, and 16, we'll be going over the nervous system. This exam will be completed during finals week. So during the finals week, I'll just open up the exam and you'll have that opportunity to take it from Monday to probably Thursday. Monday to Thursday of finals week, that test will be open. So it'll be open during the week as opposed to the weekend as we usually see that. Maybe I'll even open up over the weekend and then I'll give you all the way to Thursday to complete it. But again, we are here towards the end of the semester, the nervous system. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes here going over the next couple, giving the overview of the next couple of things over the semester here as we go over the next 3 weeks, chapters 12, 13, and 14. So chapter 12 is going to be called nervous tissue. I'll call it nervous tissue. Chapter 13 I will call anatomy of the nervous system. So we'll look at the different parts of the brain, parts of the spinal cord, and the somatic nervous system. So we actually look at some of those pathways in which, information travels from the brain all the way to the muscles related to movement, or in the opposite, sensory, where the information that is taken in from the outside world, then sent from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system to the brain and spinal cord, right? So the nervous tissue, chapter 12. I've got a couple of slides there. Hopefully you can see there. The divisions of the nervous system is going to be a big one. So knowing let me go here. So knowing the differences between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, as well as the functional components. So the functional components, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger there. The functional components also equal like the sensory or afferent integration or association, and the motor or the efferent, right? So you've got the central versus peripheral nervous system, and the functional components of that, which is the sensory, the afferent, the integration components. The neurons versus the neuroglia, so the different types of cells, almost looking at the histology. Maybe we'll call that histology. Neurons, neuroglia, that's where we're looking at here. And then you can see here we're talking about some of the functional and classifications of neurons. So neurons have different shapes, but they also have different functions. And so that's kind of how we're going to look at them in terms of their function and their structural classification, and then a little bit more about the synapse, right? The synapse is going to be talking about the activity that occurs related to the connection between different neurons. Then we talk about resting membrane potential and the action potential, right? So talking about the activities that elicit a signal to be sent down the axon of a nerve, and ultimately where we're going to be looking at breaking it down, very similar to what we saw related to a muscle. We're going over the steps of an action potential. So we saw it with the muscle tissue. We'll look at it again in the nervous tissue, the steps of an action potential. Then finally, the main difference here associated with the action potential is that it is different neurotransmitters. So we talked about acetylcholine in muscular tissue, right? That is the neurotransmitter that stimulates a muscle contraction. However, we'll also talk about some other neurotransmitters, glutamate, GABA, and glycine in that category as well. In chapter 13, we're going to be looking at anatomy of the nervous system. So we'll be looking at the different parts of the brain, the different parts of the spinal cord. And so as a result here, what we'll be doing is identifying We'll be identifying the different parts of the brain, right? But not only the different parts of the brain, but identifying the different structural and functional components. So, what do I mean by the structural? The actual name of it, right? The temporal lobe, the occipital lobe. But also, there's function associated with it, right? Each of those parts of the brain is associated with a different function. So, the occipital lobe is associated with vision. Same thing associated with the spinal cord, right? There is different regions of the brain that are associated with motor or sensory, and so we should be able to identify those different parts based on their location. And as you can imagine, this will be a big portion of your practical exam, right? We'll be identifying the different parts of the brain and the different parts of the spinal cord. And then finally, chapter 14, the somatic nervous system. So we're going to put it all together here where we look at the different pathways. We connect all these neurons into a pathway. So there is the pathway associated with your 5 basic senses. So there's taste and smell, which are chemical receptors, sight, which is a light receptor, balance, and hearing, which are both mechanical receptors, right? So the ability to detect mechanical changes. So in the case of balance, you have these little fluid sensors so you turn your head one way, the fluid moves in the other, and it brushes these hairs. Very similar, I shouldn't say same hairs, similar hairs that are utilized in hearing, right? So it bends those hairs, causes the hearing. The pathways you can see here are going to be ascending pathways, the dorsal column system, and the lateral spinal thalamic tract. And then the descending pathway here, the lateral cortical spinal tract. So, ascending pathway, maybe we'd be familiar with that as more of a sensory pathway, right? A sensory pathway being something that takes information. So, the dorsal column system or the dorsal column's tract is responsible for providing information of like light touch, vibration, proprioception to the brain, whereas the lateral spinal thalamic tract is responsible for pain and temperature, right? Pain and temperature being provided there. And then finally, the descending tracts, which are going to be motor. These motor tracts are associated with, or primarily the one that we'll be talking about is the lateral corticospinal tract, right? The lateral corticospinal tract. And that's the sections that we'll be looking at here. Jump a couple more slides here to the review, where we'll be looking at the nervous system, the anatomy of the nervous system, the somatic nervous tissue system as well, and ultimately finishing off in finals week with the exam. So, again, guys, continue to work hard, and we are there in the home stretch. So I look forward to seeing all your responses as we finish.